So thank you very much for being with us. I wish us a fruitful discussion. And I now pass over to my friend, Robbie Nathanson, CEO of the Macro Center.
Well, thank you very much, Miki, for this very short presentation on what IPN is and what you do at the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung office in Tel Aviv. And now I'll pass on the floor to Robbie Nathanson, Dr. Robbie Nathanson, who is the director of the Macro Center for Political Economics. And as you probably know, in 1995, he was chosen to head Israel's Economic and Social Planning Administration in the Prime Minister's Office of Prime Minister Rabin. Robbie, thank you for letting us organize or co-organize this event, and the floor is yours.
Yes, Roger and IMET, thank you very much for hosting this event. I also want to thank, of course, Friedrich Ebert Stiftung for being the umbrella organization, also supporting this important project since 2003, and also thank also my colleagues Ruth and Jan for the efforts they did to make this event through in these difficult times, and also thank also the other participants in this important panel that respond to our invitation and here with us in this very prominent circle. Thank you also for mentioning, Roger, my position in 95. This was the Administration for Peace and Economic Research, meaning that the intention was then to prepare the Israeli society for peace times in economic and social context following the Oslo agreements. I don't want to go back to the history then, but we are now passing through another period where to say we are talking about peace, but it's a total different peace approach than the peace approach Rabin has and we did have in the beginning of the 90s, and perhaps we can elaborate on that a little later in the context of our web seminar. This event is, of course, one of many other activities we are planning with IMET, but also following the seminar that we intend to hold in March in Barcelona, which was well prepared, but unfortunately didn't take place. Instead of, we are also to have a continuity of our cooperation, this seminar addressing also very important issues on the agenda, hoping that next year we will be able to make and revive the seminar or conference in Barcelona that we originally did plan. But for the time being, we have to hope and not more than that, and look and see what will be the corona situation in our region and elsewhere to look and see if we can do that. Let me, in my introductory remarks, share with you a presentation that I prepared for this occasion that is a follow-up of a web seminar that we did have on the 27th of July, when the issue of the annexation was very strong on the agenda, meaning that the Israeli government was about to decide about this annexation following the Trump initiative. And the debate was what would be the consequences of this annexation for international relations, for the Palestinian situation in the occupied territories, for the EU-Israeli relations, and so forth. Our approach as Macro Center was to address this issue from the angle of the economic cost of the annexation. And let me share with you some data that we have prepared towards that seminar, meaning that we presented a calculation reflecting the cost for Israel, which will have been 52 billion shekels a year, meaning that this will be, or could have been, the cost of the annexation following also the fact that the Palestinian Authority would fall apart following the annexation, and Israel would take over the the responsibility for 2.6 million Palestinians, meaning that we would have been a situation to provide the Palestinian population with education, national health services, governmental services, and so forth. All that would have sum up to 52 billion shekels. But this is only the direct cost. Of course, the indirect cost of boycotts and also downgrade of Israel as the economic situation, downgrade Israel, and also the reduction of foreign investment and things like that would have brought us to a much higher cost than this direct cost. On top of it, we see here the enormous investment that EU institutions and other European countries have done during the years to maintain the Palestinian Authority alive, and this sum up also to something like $19 billion in total, which is a huge investment during the years that would have vanished if the annexation would have taken place. And this is an additional cost also from the international point of view, meaning that the annexation would have had a very high economic cost also for Europe, also for the contributing countries, also, of course, for Israel, and not to talk about the suffering of the people in these occupied areas that would have increased by far compared also to the present situation. Contrary to that, now we have, of course, been surprised, so to say, during, it's a bigger question mark if this was really a surprise or not, but anyway, this new peace agreement with the United Arab Emirates changed the situation totally, and means for Israel also new economic opportunities that we calculate, also relying on an analysis of the Rand Institute about 1.9% increase of GDP and 6.5 billion euros in the first place. Other positive outcomes of this agreement could be strengthening ties with EU. I mean, meaning that EU would have to also define its position in the, or its relation in the Middle East and the Eastern Middle East more specifically, and this is something we can talk about during this seminar as well. And most of all, due to this agreement, annexation intentions of Israel have been totally frozen, and this has been also practically the price that Israel had paid for having these agreements. So if I can summarize, then we can tell about the cost of and benefits of the annexation versus the present situation. The cost would have been 52 billion shekels, of course, that Israel would have had to pay in case the Palestinian Authority would have dismantled. Another $19 billion that EU has donated that would have been wasted. And in case only the annexation of Area C and not all the territories, we would have a direct cost of 8.5 billion shekels in that case. The benefits are in the present situation, new potential agreements and normalization with Arab countries, trade agreements, and the new opportunities to strengthen the relations between Israel and EU. But concluding, it goes without saying that these agreements provide the Arab countries and also the moderate Arab countries an enormous leverage on Israel to say not to dare to think about annexation anyway, and then other leverages that could be the outcome of this move in the future, like expanding the settlements. and so forth. But the elephant in the room is, of course, what happens with the permanent status solution in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And this is also, of course, a big question mark. What will happen now following this new situation? And this is also challenging us in the context of what we are talking about today, and I believe will also challenge us in the near future as well. So I thought this couple of insights might be inspiring to start also the debate on those issues, and of course any other of the issues that we are about to talk about. And I also refer to the paper that was prepared by Ruth and Jan, talking about different scenarios, also following this new situation that we are looking forward to hear about, and from there also open the debate to the other participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robbie, for such a comprehensive explanation of the costs and the benefits of an annexation which has not taken place. And as we are running out of time, we have lots of interesting speakers to hear, and we also want to have a debate with the attendees that are with us. I will now move to the next point in our program's agenda, and this is the presentation of the document entitled Narratives on Annexation Scenarios. And to do that, we have two excellent researchers, Dr. Jan Butze and Dr. Ruth Hanau-Santini. Dr. Jan Butze is Senior Research Fellow and Lecturer, Research Assistant at the Professorship for International Politics and Conflict Research at the University of the Federal Armed Forces in Munich. And Dr. Ruth Hanau-Santini is Associate Professor of Politics and International Relations at the Università L'Orientale in Naples, and she's also Associate Fellow at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in Bologna. So I think we are going to start with Jan, Dr. Butze. So the floor is yours.
Thank you for the kind words, Roger, and also thank you, Mickey and Robbie, for your introduction. So before Ruth will give you an idea about the three scenarios we have tried to develop, I just wanted to give you an idea about annexation as such. And as a disclaimer, we can definitely highlight that we developed these scenarios in June and July. And of course, the current events were to a certain extent also a surprise to us, but still I think it is possible to relate the current rapprochement in the region with the topic of annexation. But interestingly, perhaps the topic of annexation as such is not really new to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because at first we had the annexation of East Jerusalem, which was formalized in 1980 through the Jerusalem law and the Knesset, and then we also had the annexation of the Golan Heights as opposed to the status of the occupied Palestinian territories. So interestingly, in the previous year, so we see this is also nothing new, we had recognition of the annexation of the Golan Heights by the current US administration. And the debate about annexing the West Bank or parts of the West Bank is also not really new, but has been around in right-wing circles in Israeli politics for some time. But it gained new momentum with the Trump peace plan, which was presented in January 2020, because it explicitly included the possibility of annexing about up to 30% of the West Bank, regardless of a peace deal with the Palestinians. So this gave Netanyahu the chance to use this option of annexation in his election campaign. And I would say it was very much domestically motivated. And in the end, also his opponents supported this option. And in public, it was highlighted that from 1st of July onwards, annexation could happen. it did not. And then we had the situation with the rapprochements with the United Arab Emirates. So this is basically the context we are currently looking at. And Robbie also mentioned this option of further improvement of relations towards other Arab countries as a kind of a positive incentive of, for refraining from annexation. But I think it's important to stress that it got suspended, but it's not entirely off the table. And therefore, I would say it is reasonable to discuss different scenarios for the future in terms of annexation. And my colleague Ruth Hanau-Santini will provide you with an overview over these three scenarios we have developed.
Thanks, Jan. Thanks, everyone. I hear some echo. I might have problems or issues with my Wi-Fi. I'm sorry, I just moved. So in case Jan will take over, I hope he will hold on. So thanks IEMED and IAPN for this event, which I think, despite all the news and the most recent developments, is really timely. The Abraham Accord are not dramatically changing the annexation underlying and deep dynamics. So, which is why we still consider the three scenarios that we shared with you in our document as quite reasonable options for the future developments between Israel and the Palestinians. So the first scenario is actually no annexation, and no annexation today meaning indefinite postponement, right? So this is what basically the Abraham Accord, so the Israeli Emirati agreements are premised on, at least from the standpoint of Abu Dhabi. So the postponement of annexation without a date. Of course, from the Israeli standpoint, this is not an indefinite postponement, it's just for the time being. So there's the double discourse, of course, and the risk of at least different interpretation given to the timeline of this postponement. But within this scenario, there is therefore a limited impact in terms of conditions for the Palestinians living in the West Bank and mostly the West Bank as compared to today. This is premised, the indefinite postponement of annexation, on the formulation of negative conditionality vis-à-vis Israel from the EU, from other Arab countries, from the US, in terms of being able to withhold military aid and military cooperation if the annexation went, if annexation threats were materialized. So in this scenario, the idea is that in exchange for normalization, which we've seen with the Emirates, with Bahrain, possibly with other countries, Israel would hold off for a significant amount of time any further formal move of annexing significant parts of the West Bank. We consider this scenario not very likely, also given the US administration, but also the Biden team to be quite tolerant and open to possibilities of accepting, if not endorsing, unilateral Israeli actions. So we remember the Biden talk at AIPAC, where he said that what would change under his presidency would be more support, especially financial, towards the Palestinians, but there wouldn't be a stigmatization of Israeli actions. So, of course, in the absence of negative conditionality as a threat, as a stick from the US side, the no annexation scenario becomes very unlikely. The second scenario that we consider, which is more likely, is the annexation of big settlements by Israel in Area C, including Ma'ale Adumim, Gush Etzion, and others, that would correspond to a percentage of a range of territory in the West Bank between 7 and 23% of the whole of the West Bank. There would be a few dozen thousands of Palestinians which would then be annexed to Israel in this scenario. that would have a significant impact on their livelihoods, especially because they would not be granted citizenship. It would be difficult to grant them a permanent residency status, as was the case with the East Jerusalem Palestinians. Or if that was the case, that could still be revoked at any time. So this would put additional dozens of thousands of Palestinians in a very uncertain legal status situation. That would also imply flows of Palestinian refugees from the Jordan Valley to Jordan, in addition to the Palestinian refugees already living in Jordan. Right, so the third and last scenario is a large-scale annexation scenario, which not only includes big Jewish settlements in the West Bank, which would be included, especially those close to the Jordan Valley, but also strategic resources, strategic from the standpoint of Israel, including infrastructures, including water resources, and we refer in particular to the Yarkon Tanimim aquifer in the mountain aquifer in the West Bank, but also Palestinian agricultural lands, which would be annexed despite the June resolution of the Israeli Supreme Court, which problematizes these actions by the Israeli government. This would lead to a basically de facto separation of the north from the south of the West Bank and the isolation of Jericho. This scenario would have the highest impact for Palestinians, also in terms of flows of refugees towards Jordan, but also in terms of food insecurity rising for Palestinians remaining in the West Bank, especially given the then increasingly difficult access to water resources. So basically what we have so far outlined are three scenarios where, starting from the one which we consider the least likely, the no annexation scenario, which is the one that has the lowest impact, we then consider two maybe equally likely scenarios which have though quite different impact on Palestinian livelihoods. So then, of course, it becomes, I mean, the key is assessing the indicators. So how do we assess which one is more likely or least likely between the two latter scenarios? And this really depends on a number of considerations that are also contingent, right? So the next presidential elections in the US, where we see that the rising importance of the evangelical vote that is driving President Trump to increasingly show a very proactive attitude towards pushing Gulf Arab states towards normalization with Israel, but also accepting, if not all, most unilateral actions by Israel. We also see from the Israeli side increasing tensions domestically, linked to the economic slowdown, linked to the mishandling of the pandemic, linked to Bibi Netanyahu's corruption trial ongoing, and the instability that this is leading, but also linked to the fact that we don't see an alternative yet, linked to the low credibility and maybe increased the legitimacy of Gantz as an alternative to Prime Minister Netanyahu. So we see then from the European standpoint a number of challenges linked to the fact that there has been an attempt also to divide European countries from the outside vis-a-vis their reaction to these normalization attempts. And this is a time of increasing challenges geopolitically for Europe, from Belarus and Russia to, of course, Brexit, to China and the ongoing negotiations with China on trade agreements, but also human rights. And Israel comes on top, and the annexation scenarios come on top of an already very complex situation for European geopolitics. So having said that, I would then like maybe to leave the floor to Jan if he has any final consideration before proceeding forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. I think don't have that much to add, even though I would say that the likelihood is currently hard to assess in the face of the situation in flux with the current rapprochement as an incentive that might eventually be much more considerable than other aspects. But in this regard, and in others, I'm very curious about what our three speakers will have to say. And I guess Roger will then take over. So thank you.
Well, indeed, and thank you for this wonderful presentation. I believe that the paper will be edited and uploaded on the website of IEPN, so that everybody who wants to read it will have direct access to the website. And it is true that when we started preparing this event, the focus was put on how to prevent Israel from undertaking unilateral moves on the annexation, as had been pledged by Prime Minister Netanyahu. But then, when we developed the concept of the event, the whole events of the Abraham Accords popped up, and we had to somehow divert a little bit the initial focus of the event. To that end, I think that we have invited three excellent senior experts today, and we are really looking forward to hear what they have to say on what we have presented and on what is happening at the moment. First of all, Ksenia Svetlova, who is an Israeli politician, journalist, and associate professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and also policy fellow at the Israeli Institute for Regional Foreign Policies, MIPIM, which is a think tank with which we also have a lot of contacts and ties. I think that its Director General Nimrod Golan is today among us. But furthermore, Mrs. Svetlova was and served as a member of the Knesset of the Israeli Parliament for the Zionist Union, which was a center-left alliance to contest the 2015 general elections. We are also delighted to have among us, even though I think that now she's going through some technical problems, Mrs. Hiba Husseini, who is the managing partner at the law firm of Husseini and Husseini. And she is also chairing the legal committee to final status negotiations between the Palestinians and Israelis. And finally, we are also delighted to have once again, because she's a regular attendant to some of our events organized through the network Euromesco, the presence of Dr. Muriel Asseburg, who is a senior fellow at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs in Berlin, SWP, and she also holds different positions, like she's a member of the Expert Forum on Asylum and Migration at the German Federal Office for Migration and Refugee. We are very pleased to have you among us, and we are going to start with Mrs. Svetlova. So, Mrs. Svetlova, the floor is yours.
Unmuting. It's good to be here, and thank you so much for the possibility to share our views and concerns about the current situation with friends and colleagues. I think it's very important especially because of the slight feeling in Israel, I would say, of euphoria due to the signing of the Abraham Accords yesterday in Washington, and the focus on the indeed the wonderful perspectives that we are having now with Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Manama, while trying to sideline everything else, including the very burning Palestinian issues, away from us. Okay, so I think basically this was the orchestrated attempt of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and of course all of the American team, American ambassador in Israel, to make Israelis believe that you can make peace with somebody who is thousands of kilometers from your border, but at the same time to let go, of even discussing any possibilities that have to do with our closest neighbors, the Palestinians. And the reminder came in the very sensitive moment of the speech of the Emirati minister. As you know, 2 rockets hit the southern towns of Israel, and there were many more during the night. This is my take is that the old Middle East saying hello to the new Middle East. Okay, if we can use this phrase, you know, like a paraphrase from what the late President Shimon Peres used to say. Of course, he was dreaming of some other kind of new Middle East, not only this that is built on interests, but also one that is united around some kind of ideology of peace and reconciling with your neighbors. So getting back to the issue of annexation. So just like my colleagues that spoke before, I am sure that although, you know, for now, for the next maybe, you know, a month or 2, things do not hold for very long here in Israel, the issue of annexation will be frozen. But it can be defrozen also very easily. It's not off the table. It will be a mistake to think that due to the latest developments with Emirates and Bahrain, the very sensitive and important issue to the right wing, the extreme right wing, will be annulled and will be just, you know, buried and, you know, put away. And I am saying so because we know that although we are not in the election battle right now, officially, but actually, you know, de facto it seems that we are, because everybody knows, everybody suspects that the closest elections, you know, will not take place in 2023 as they are supposed to by law, but the chances are that they will, you know, occur. They will be declared by, you know, winter and will take place in March, or will be, you know, declared in March and then take place in sometime in June, for example. Okay, so we are going into an election year. I think this is quite clear. Now, if we are looking at the political map, then unfortunately the center left and especially the left does not pose any threat to the ruling party and its leader Benjamin Netanyahu. However, the right-wing party, Yamina, actually does. And Naftali Bennett keeps growing in the polls day after day. He is being very active when criticizing from the opposition the government on corona issues. When the Israelis will understand that they are not flying to Abu Dhabi anytime soon, again, because of corona, not because the Emiratis are against it, then I think the enthusiasm about the newly signed agreements will be, you know, curbed a little bit. And the chances are that closer to the elections, the file of the annexation will be firmly on our table once again. And the main theme, you know, because we see it already now in the speeches, you know, of the politicians from the right wing, this is the blame that they will cast on Netanyahu, that he traded annexation for peace with UAE and Bahrain. This is obviously something, in order to keep the base at bay, Netanyahu cannot afford to. Okay, so I would think that it's more probable that after a few months, and despite of everything that was said yesterday by the Emiratis and the Bahrainis, of course they need to say it because they need to explain to their own people and also to their critics in the Arab world that that there was some price that Israel had to pay. Okay, it's not the peace deal with the Palestinians, but at least it's a cancellation, you know, of the annexation. But it's not the cancellation. This is, you know, this is what we are coming to this point exactly. So now, in the midst of a very deep corona crisis, we are going back to the quarantine, starting from Friday for they say 3 weeks, but it could be for more. The annexation, it's not really ranked very high on the agenda of the Israeli voters. But this is the situation for now, okay? So for now, also Bennett is not making a big deal out of it. And of course, Netanyahu, who we know, you know, that it was his decision to shelf it away and to concentrate right now on the historical agreements, you know, with the UAE and Bahrain. Of course, he is not gonna, you know, touch it at all. But as long as the situation will be a little bit brighter, as long we will be approaching, the day of elections, they will pull it again, from the shelf, and then we will see, going back to the same thing. Now, in between, what can happen, and I'm talking about our Palestinian friends and partners in the Palestinian autonomy. Because they know also very well that it's not something that it's constant. It's not a promise that is written in stone, that Israel will not perform the annexation. They are living in a very tense situation, but basically getting prepared for the next level, for the next stage. So the Palestinian Authority is getting weaker by every single day. And Israel is assuming more responsibilities over the civilian population in the West Bank. So we are basically sliding very comfortably and without anybody basically taking note of it to the direct control of the Palestinian. So we are going back to pre-1993. And so whether annexation will physically happen or not, I personally have doubts about this because, it's one thing to talk about it and during the election campaign. It's quite another, to actually go forward with this, despite everything that our security experts and army chiefs are saying. Okay, but even if it will be just, they will be flanking with it like a card that they are pulling in order to make political capital. All of these promises, all of these lies, all of them, they are weakening the Palestinians, and they're increasing the matter of control of the Israeli army over the Palestinians. We see it already during the last 3-4 months since the moment that the Palestinian Authority cut the direct channel, with the Israelis, and they dismantle some of their positions, for example, for the police in Abu Dis and so on. Who is taking care of the civilian affairs in this gray zone? It's Israel. Who is right now dealing with the traders that need to go to Jordan, that need to bring goods, that need to bring taxes and so on? It's Israel. People who are in the system, whom I'm speaking with, the military, I mean, they are shocked. They are shocked because this is major things, major shifts happening without the world basically noticing what is happening. So just to sum it up, I will say that the fragility of the Palestinian Authority during this autumn and winter, considering also the corona and the economical pressures, and also the attempts of the Hamas to sideline the PA, with all of their might, they will pursue, this goal. It seems quite clear, and they will try to use this situation in order to also to get control of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Okay, so this is with the goal number one. Okay, so all of this together, it makes the probability of surviving of the PA as very, very difficult. Hi, Kat. And it makes us, those who believe in dialogue with the Palestinians and fighting together against the annexation place with the Palestinian Authority, being extremely worried about that. So annexation will come back to us, perhaps sooner than later. I'm not sure what the Emirati or Bahraini government will make out of it, if they will respond or not. I think there was also a big wait for the American presidential elections and who will eventually take it, because the whole system of moral orienteers and political orienteers can change completely after November the 3rd. So we should wait and see about that. But in the meantime, we should also pay attention to the crawling annexation, to the changing of the status quo all the time, to what is happening inside the Israeli military and its direct responsibility of the Palestinian civilians. And in the end of the day, we still have over our heads, we still have this occupation as a big black cloud that might rain someday, We don't know exactly when it will happen.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Petlova. I would retain three things that you said. The first one is that annexation is not gone. It's there. It's you said, a gray cloud that is upon us. Second thing is that formalizing relations with for Israel with Arab governments or governments in the Gulf region is not the same as Israel making peace with the Arab people. That's I think it's very clear. So thank you so much. And now we move to Dr. Asselberg, because we're still in the process of getting back Mrs. Husseini. So we will probably move first to you, and then try to see if we can get back Ms. Husseini. So Muriel, the floor is yours, and thanks again for being among us. It's always a real pleasure.
Thanks a lot, Roger, and thanks a lot to the organizers for inviting me. I think this is a very important discussion, especially because we had a lot of diplomatic interaction and think tank interaction ahead of the 1st July deadline, and that has died down now. And I think it's important, and I'll point out why, that we keep on the momentum discussion annexation issues and how Europeans and others in the world deal with the situation. I would like to go back to the three scenarios that Ruth outlined. And I think the way you did that, basically building the three scenarios around the scope of annexation, is one way of doing it. I would choose another day of building three scenarios. And my way would be to build it around the context of annexation. So I would say there is three ways that annexation could occur. One would be unilateral Israeli annexation. The second one would be annexation in the context of implementation of the Trump plan, that is in the context of, well, if you want to call it peace negotiations. And the third one would be that no formal annexation occurs. And then, of course, you can still distinguish different scopes of annexations. And I think there I'm very closely to what you outline in your three scenarios. I think the least likely of the three scenarios that I suggest is annexation in the context of the implementation of the Trump plan. First, because we will not have any Palestinian consent to negotiate on the basis of the Trump plan, but also because that plan has become so divisive within the Israeli, not only society, but also within the Israeli right, because of the potential of having a Palestinian state, even though that Palestinian state would only be in name, not in substance. Then there is unilateral annexation. And as Ksenia has pointed out, and others have said before, that has been postponed, but is not off the table. So it's still there. I still think that the third scenario is the most likely, and that is that we will not see any large-scale formal annexation. However, I would not call that a no annexation scenario, because it would not be the formal step of an announced large-scale annexation, but we would still see the ongoing creeping annexation, which is not only de facto, but also de jure, in the sense that Israeli law has been and is being extended to parts of the West Bank. And we see how that has even in parallel to negotiations with the Arab Gulf states been driven forward. In the vicinity of Jerusalem, first and foremost, with the extensive increase in house demolitions and so on. So these plans are being followed, and they are taking place. Why do I think that that scenario is the most likely one? because what we're currently seeing, that is denormalization with Arab Muslim states, is much, I would say, the preferred option for Netanyahu, and it was a great move for him to get out of this formal annexation promise. I think, or my assessment of his personality is that he has a great interest in avoiding that formal move. He has an interest in what he has been pursuing over the last 15 years, and also in his earlier term in office, keeping the so-called status quo and not going towards any kind of final settlement with the Palestinians. The status quo is convenient with the PA as a subcontractor of the occupation. And I'll get back to what you said, Ksenia, about that erosion of functionality. It's convenient because, and Robbie has pointed that out, the EU takes on large parts of the costs of the occupation. And it's also convenient because you can maintain that image that what is taking place between the river and the sea has nothing to do with apartheid, as long as that can be seen as temporary occupation in a process. So I think that is the most likely scenario. Even if we don't see formal annexation, we will also not see any move towards ending the occupation and towards a Palestinian state being established. Rather, what we're seeing is the entrenchment of the one state reality, the deepening of the overarching control of Israel over Palestinian lives, and the PA becoming ever more dysfunctional, and the rather big likelihood of the PA breaking down in parts or completely. I think now we are having the discussion first and foremost in the media. I just read a piece by the former envoy Tony Blair, in which he claims that the Abraham Accords actually are a great opportunity for making peace also between Israel and the Palestinians. I think he sticks out as one of the few with such an interpretation of the Accords. And I think that interpretation couldn't be farther away from reality. The potential leverage that was in the Arab Peace Initiative, which of course was never enacted, but at least it was a potential leverage that there would be normalization between Arab states and Israel if Israel ended the occupation. That formula definitely has been broken with the Abraham Accords. The Arab consensus on land for peace has now been replaced by what Bibi likes to term peace for peace. I would say it's rather peace for fighter jets. So we're really away from that kind of potential conditionality. That also means that occupation has become even less costly than before. And there is very little incentive, negative or positive, for an Israeli government to move towards giving up control over territories occupied in 1967. I also think that it's rather unlikely that Gulf states or other states that are going to normalize relations with Israel will throw their weight around for Palestinian rights, not only because they couldn't care less, but also because of the way the PA has been handling that issue and has not tried to get a foot in, but rather, well, withdrawn once more to a position of rejection and boycott. The fear that I have is that Europeans that have been very active diplomatically to prevent formal annexation, to maintain a two-states option, to maintain the space for negotiated solution, to maintain the principle of inadmissibility of acquisition of territory by force over the summer will now sit back, will be relieved because we do not see that kind of big step of formal annexation. And they will wait once more until the next escalation comes or that formal step of annexation seems to materialize, rather than addressing the situation now. And I think the latter is the one that would need to be done very importantly now. And I think it has at least two big elements. At least I want to mention these two big elements. One is that Europeans really need to review their cooperation with Israel and the Palestinians and see how they can act in an environment of prolonged and therefore illegal occupation. How can they support Palestinian voice and presence in the Palestinian territories without entrenching prolonged occupation? And how can that be done even in the absence of a two-state objective? The way I see it, cooperation with the PA in the absence of that objective has lost its rationale. So we need to figure out how we can cooperate with the Palestinians in order to guarantee that they're not being driven out of territory and driven into misery more than is the case to date. And the second element is that there is urgent need, I think, to engage in conflict resolution. Now, the Europeans have already been calling for that all the time. I see a risk in just going back to the old formulas rather than analyzing what has gone wrong in the past and then building on that and trying to make it better. I think one issue in that context is of particular importance. One is Europeans should not engage in any rhetoric or action that would legitimize the deal of the century, because that plan is in direct contravention of internationally agreed parameters and the EU position. I think Europeans should prepare for an appropriate multilateral framework for negotiations that cannot be put in place with the current US administration, but potentially with an incoming one. And the third one is that they shouldn't throw overboard the two-state approach yet. But in view of the trends that we're seeing on the ground, they should open much more up to exploring other options in cooperation with local actors to see what their potential for conflict resolution is. And I'll stop here.
Okay.
Thank you, Muriel. Robbie, would you like to add anything at this stage?
No, only one technical thing. I was trying to connect Hiva. She told me that she hear us and see us, but she is probably among the participants. So perhaps your technical people can connect her to talk.
Okay, so we'll ask Jordi to check whether this is feasible. Unfortunately, when we organize this kind of events, we rely very much on the connection of everybody, and sometimes there are some technical barriers. But of course, we would like to hear her voice and her opinion, and we will see if this happens. Until this is not a case. What I suggest is that we close now this session, and then we move to a number of questions and comments from the audience. We still have some 25 minutes, so we have time, and I would suggest that everybody gets ready to raise points and questions and to energize the debate, because this is also the objective of this event. But before moving to the session, I would like to thank once more Dr. Muriel for this very insightful explanation, presentation, which I could personally not agree more with. Keeping the status quo, as you rightly said, with this maybe some partial the Uri annexation is probably the most likely scenario. And then a second thing that you also highlighted together with Senia, which I forgot to mention before, is this fragility, this permanent, I would say now, structural fragility of the Palestinian Authority, which of course endangers the two-state solution, together with what is also okay. So let's see. We have a number of people that want to intervene. Remember that you can also use the function of type message here. So you can, you don't need to speak if you don't want to speak. You can also send the question to the speakers. And I will now give the floor to Oded Eran. Oded Eran, he's a senior expert at the INSS. But prior to that, he served as Israel's ambassador to the European Union from 2002 to 2007. We're very happy to have you among us. So Mr. Eran, if you are around, because you asked me to speak, please go ahead. Oh, seems that he's not there. The problem there again with this format is that people ask for the floor and then they leave. Because I also had the floor from a request to speak from Eran Etzion. I don't know if Eran Etzion is here. Okay. Yes, he's there. Okay, he's there, but it doesn't seem that he can connect. So I will give the floor to Ruth because I know Ruth. Eran Etzion. Yeah, now he's there. Okay.
I don't see myself. It's a very strange Zoom customization that you did here.
Okay, well, sorry for that.
To me, the interesting question is, actually, it has a lot to do with the American administration more than the Israeli or European or even Arabic side. What is it that made Trump reverse his position on unilateral annexation? I believe Netanyahu, mostly I don't, but in this case I do, that he received clear assurances from Trump, that unilateral annexation will be green-lighted in the context of the Trump plan. So what is it that changed Trump's mind? I know some Israelis that take credit for this change. I also know some Europeans that take credit for this change. But I don't think it is deserved. Maybe there was some contribution, but I don't think that's the main story. And I don't pretend to know what the main story is, okay? But I think this is the interesting question because it has implications for the near future, or possibly even the longer future if Trump is reelected. Kushner, in his briefing to Israeli press just the other day, said specifically that the commitment that was made by the Americans to the Emiratis was to shelve the annexation or the green lighting of unilateral annexation until 2024. This, of course, was denied by Netanyahu and is vehemently denied by all other Israelis that are supposed to be in the know. But actually here, I believe Trump and Kushner. So the things to note, I think, or the questions to ask, or the kind of looking forward, First of all, as I said, why did he change his mind? And I would speculate that it has to do with business dealings between Trump himself, Kushner, maybe others, and certain Emiratis. I can't prove it, of course, but that's the only real explanation I can find. And I think the Emiratis are probably right when they take credit for this change of policy. Secondly, knowing Trump and following his pattern of behavior, this kind of reversal might very well take place again. For example, immediately after a November election, if he loses. There is nothing to prevent Trump from reversing again. And in the famous in-between period, immediately after an American president is voted out, we are all familiar with that. And Obama made certain critical decisions in his time and so on and so forth. This is, I think, an interesting scenario to think about. And of course, if Trump is re-elected, I think we can anticipate, and assuming, of course, we have to assume that Netanyahu is still in office, and you know what, even if Netanyahu is replaced by a Likud leader, such as Gideon Sa'ar or Katz or Barkat or whoever, if there's a right-wing government in Israel, which is still the probable scenario after Netanyahu leaves, and in parentheses, I would say that my projection, we're speaking about scenarios, so my scenario is that Netanyahu is elected president of Israel sometime in May, and leaves the prime ministership temporarily for Gantz, but it's going to be very temporary, and we will have elections, and there will be probably a right-wing led government. So in such a situation where you have a right-wing Israeli prime minister and a second Trump administration, granted, it will not be the kind of special relations that Netanyahu and Trump enjoys. You know, the next Israeli prime minister will not be somebody that slept in Kushner's bed when he was a kid. But there will be the same kind of jointness of interests. So the bottom line here is everybody who is now kind of feeling a sense of relief, and you know, unilateral annexation is not on the table anymore, it was shelved for another 4 years, I would caution against it. And I would stop here.
Okay, two very lengthy and interesting questions. Who would like to answer? Muriel, go ahead.
Maybe
you have
not,
to, yeah.
Maybe not really an answer, because I agree with everything that Iran has said, and it was more a comment than questions, I think. Just on the first point where he said that why did Trump and his administration change their mind on annexation, greenlighting annexation, I think, I don't know about business dealings of the private persons, Trump, Kushner, but of course there is the ceremony that we just saw yesterday, and maybe more ceremonies upcoming ahead of the election, and that is of value of itself for the US administration, for the current president and the electoral, the candidate. And I think this presentation of Trump and his environs as the deal makers that can achieve things with their unconventional and creative approaches, that is being presented here, and that is important. And we shouldn't make light of that, the transactional approach seems to work, and that is of value to the candidate, Donald Trump. Yeah, that's all I want to say.
Anybody else would like to say something? Robbie? Yes.
Roger, yes, again, trying to get Hiba on the floor. So I talked to her at this minute, and she said she can hear everything and see everybody, but she cannot talk, or she might be under the participants and not on the panel members. So if you can,
we're checking that. We're checking that. Yes, to
okay.
make sure that she that she can come back. Okay.
Yes.
If nobody else wants to comment, we have a few questions now. But first, I'll give the floor to Ruth, who asked me to speak.
Thanks, Roger. So maybe just really following up on what Muriel just said, I think that a lot of also, I mean, what is in Trump's mind at the moment, again, goes back to Obama and Obama's legacy. And there's a reference to the fact that he has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by some right-wing Scandinavian member of parliament. And the timing is interesting, both for this nomination and the Abraham Accord, as well as the ceremony at the White House, which was trying to mimic also the Clinton, of course, then peace deal in 1993. So I think that there's this attempt for him to kind of make history in the way in which, you know, it's mostly about rhetoric rather than real implications, if not, as you rightly point out, peace against fighter jets, which is interesting because that was also initially a sticking point, the F-35 stealth fighter and the EA-186 Growler warfare aircraft, which Israel didn't seem so keen on letting the Emiratis have, but now has changed its mind. I have very quick points. One is we haven't mentioned reactions in the Gulf. There have been, especially from civil society organizations, both in Bahrain and in the Emirati. They have been vocal. They have come out with statements. So I wouldn't really kind of brush that aside completely. There is a public opinion. It's not maybe as thriving as we could have thought maybe 10 years ago had anything similar taken place. But as opinion polls in 2017, 2018, I think from the Arab Barometer showed, there is an overall consensus across the Arab world against considering the Palestinian issue a Palestinian issue, and an overall consensus on considering the Palestinian issue an Arab issue. So again, I think Roger made this point because Ksenia mentioned it at the beginning. I mean, it's one thing to talk about Arab leaders, and at this moment, when it comes to the Palestinian issue, it's another to talk about Arab public opinion or Arab public opinions. The second point is we haven't mentioned the reunification among Palestinian factions, which has taken place thanks to this virtual meeting organized between Beirut and Ramallah at the beginning of September, on September 3rd, between Fatah, Hamas, and Islamic Jihad. So I understand that we refer to the increasing worsening governance by Fatah in the PA and the West Bank, but politically, there is reconciliation ongoing, and both Hamas and Islamic Jihad are now pushing for a stronger united front of Palestine, and they are talking explicitly of new forms of non-violent popular resistance against Israel. So I think we should not discard Arab agency and Palestinian agency from our standpoint. And then I have a specific question for Muriel, because as you rightly pointed out, there was a lot of debate among European capitals before the July 1st deadline on implications of annexation after July 1st. And the momentum has been lost, and Europe is now again turning to its own dilemmas. But legally, I'm just wondering, but also politically, dropping the two-state solution in favor of what had come to the fore, and there are a number of American and Palestinian, of course, scholars and commentators openly pushing for the binational state solution. I'm thinking in particular of Khaled El-Gindi, Brookings, but many, many others. It seemed to be there seemed to be some momentum, at least to discuss what a binational state solution would look like. Of course, this goes against all Israeli interests. But I haven't seen a strong debate within Europe on how Europe, since the Venice Declaration and all our kind of legal binding agreements, would be able to kind of drop the two-state solution in favor of a binational state. And I'd be very glad if Muriel could give her thoughts on that. Over, thanks.
Muriel, please. I think all questions go to you. And now we have another technical problem, and this is that Senia's connection went offline. So we will try to see if she can come back. But in the meantime, please.
I think it's absolutely true what you say, Ruth, that in Europe, we don't have the same discussion as we have in the United States, for example. We don't have the same discussion when it comes to terms. We don't have the same discussion when it comes with regards to openness, to moving towards alternative approaches to dealing with the conflict. I think there is two main reasons for that. One is that the Europeans see themselves in a sense as the inventors of the two-state solution, which of course is not true because it goes back much further. But of course, the Europeans did have an important role in making it the dominant paradigm. So there is this weddedness to the solution, and there is a practical reason that you have also mentioned, and that is the rejection of a vast majority of Jewish Israelis of a binational state. Even though we have to see that this is also changing. We have by no means majorities or pluralities, but we have changes also in the Jewish Israeli public when it comes to binational state. And we have enormous changes when it comes to the Palestinian public, especially among young people in Palestine, even more so when we look at the diaspora. But there is this hesitancy to move forward. I wouldn't say that there is actually a legal inhibition with regards to that. At least when it comes to debating and exploring options. There is legal inhibition when it comes to our framework of contractual relations with Israel and the PLO, because those are based on the 1967 borders. And that would only, once we move away from that, that would all need to be changed, and that would be very questionable in terms of our own interpretation of international law. But I don't see any legal inhibitions or other than practical and ideological inhibitions in moving forward in a discussion about what could alternatives look like. And I would add my response to Maya's question to that. She asked if Europeans or the EU shouldn't be more creative rather than sticking to a two-state formula. For example, giving autonomy to the PA in the sense of a state minus status. As I tried to say repeatedly now, I think the Europeans should be more creative, but that doesn't mean that they let go of main principles for a solution that would be sustainable. And I think the main three principles that are need to be fulfilled in order for a solution to be sustainable are that there is self-determination for both people, that there is security for all people in the area we're talking about, and that there is equal civil and political rights for all people. So that excludes islands of autonomy for the Palestinians, but it opens up for alternative approaches such as a binational state or as a confederation, and that would need to be explored further.
Hiba is connected now, so
yes.
Okay.
I'll stop. Just one more sentence that
go ahead and finish, and then we move to Hiba. Yeah.
I don't see the Europeans to move forward on that unless we see movement on the Palestinian side, and that might be either a Palestinian urge towards binational state that comes from the Palestinian leadership, or breakdown of the PA, and therefore the inability of confronting the question.
Well, thank you, Muriel. And as you could see, we have the reappearance of Hiba Husseini. We're very happy, delighted that you can join us under the name of Roberto Nathanson.
Yes, it's a new identity,
which is an extraordinary. It's an extraordinary event. But please, Mrs. Husseini, the floor is yours now. It's correct. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, and I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm very sorry about the technical problems, and I appreciate very much Robbie's insistence that I rejoin you. I very much appreciate this, given the lateness of the moment and the fact that we're in the middle of the questions and the answers. Let me try to summarize my thoughts. I had like 3 pages of typewritten notes, but I don't think we have the time for that. Let me start by reiterating a few pure Palestinian perspective issues regarding the annexation, and then perhaps comment on of course, the Abraham Accords, and bring in a few other thoughts. Also, let me also state the fact that while the Palestinian position appears to be, or seems to be, one focused on rejection and boycott of everything that is happening with respect to the annexation plans, and preceding that to the Trump peace plan, and more so now with respect to the Abraham Accords, I think it stems from the fact that we feel terribly, terribly isolated. And we, at the international, regional, and within the context of our Arab relations. We have focused on the principles, and the principles as established under the Oslo Accords. And anything, and that has been our, of course, as you very well know, our minimal position. In terms of annexation itself, we regard it as illegal under international law, and it's also prohibited by the Charter of the UN. It's also a crime under the Rome Statute because it infringes the rights of the population in the occupied territories. We are under occupation, and the annexation would have been a unilateral step taken by the Israeli side, and stems, as you very well know, from President Trump's peace plan, and a pledge by Netanyahu to get re-elected. So it's based on a lot of calculations internal to Israel, internal to the Israeli, to Netanyahu and Trump's relationship together, rather than reflecting genuine Israeli policies. As was mentioned, also, the annexation by Israel is not first, or would not have been the first attempt. East Jerusalem itself is annexed. The Golan Heights are annexed. From our perspective, the annexation would have annulled the legitimacy of the Palestinian rights, our right to self-determination, and would have prejudiced and hindered the two-state solution. It legitimizes the settlements and the confiscation, annexation of Palestinian land. It also it's almost tantamount to a declaration of war on the Palestinians, because it leaves us without room to negotiate the swaps. It affects over 100,000 Palestinians living in Area C, and the areas that would have been annexed. So it would lead to displacement, as was suggested, whether it's to Jordan, to other parts of the Palestinian territories under our control in terms of Area A and B, causing further problems and further ghettoing of the Palestinians, and would be living in very difficult circumstances. It will create residents. Perhaps if Palestinians were to stay, as was mentioned, in those annexed areas, would create a situation like East Jerusalem, permanent residents of their own state, residents of Area C. So again, create a de facto situation for the isolation of Palestinians. It will affect, as was said also, the natural resources, the water resources, the mountain aquifer. It will create, the Jordan Valley is known as the breadbasket for the Palestinians. So it will create, it will reduce that breadbasket for us. It will create the food insecurity, limit further water resources. Not to mention the fact that it will create more fragmentation of the Palestinian territories and will lead to greater friction between the Israelis and the Palestinians, further curtail Palestinian freedom of movement, and making all these buffer zones that we would have needed between the Israelis and the Palestinians even more closely connected. So these are just highlights of the negative implications for the Palestinians. So it's not just simply because we want to say no to the Abraham Accords and we want to simply say no to the annexation. It's simply creating a perpetuation of the occupation, altering the balance even further, and leading to more and more isolation of the Palestinians. We have in Arabic, for those who understand Arabic and listening, we have a saying. I mean, 1948 was the Nakba, 1967 was the Nakse, and now it's the Kapse. The Abraham Accords are the Kapse for us, which means we moved from catastrophe in 48 to a setback in 1967, and now we're just being hammered like a nail, and that is very, very disconcerting. The Palestinians wanted their minimal rights. The fragmentation in which we live today, the cost of the occupation that we have today, the difficulties we experience on a day-to-day, our inability to combat even matters like the COVID today. These are all issues that are affecting us day in, day out. And then we have something called, a deal between Trump and Netanyahu that seems to serve the Israeli interests. And then they are bypassed completely. No coordination whatsoever between the Emirates, Bahrain, and other Arab countries that would follow suit to normalize. Normalization will not end occupation, and it will perpetuate the occupation. And annexation, as was mentioned also by this, the Abraham Accords are not a guarantee against stopping the annexation. It is suspended for a limited period of time. We all understand the double standards by which the Netanyahu administration operates, and by which general Israeli politics operate vis-a-vis the Palestinians and the occupation. I think while for some, from a certain perspective, there seems to be an opportunity that and a new leverage that would be created by the Abraham Accords, and given the shift today, and it's a reality that we cannot ignore, of course. And it will be the big question is for the Palestinians. Now we are challenged even more, and this conflict with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is not even close to being resolved or addressed. It's being bypassed and being sidelined. Israel seems to be operating on a totally new trajectory, of course, vis-a-vis its regional interests and global interests. And now the Arab states that are joining this normalization and seem to be heralding a new relationship with Israel is being done yet again at the expense of the Palestinians. And we are being left out from the equation. I'll just perhaps end on this point in terms of the negative consequences that both the annexation plans would have had, and we probably will see some annexation taking place because it hasn't really stopped. I mean, the settlements continue to encroach on Palestinian territory. The settlement buildup continues to grow in around East Jerusalem. The territories are isolated and continuously. So sure, there is more limited freedom of movement, but after the move of the embassy, the U.S. embassy into Jerusalem, by the American embassy into Jerusalem, we see that Jerusalem is even further isolated physically from the West Bank, and there's almost no access to West Bankers to Jerusalem. So the only benefit here is for the Israeli side, and of course their relationship and interest with the Arab countries that have normalized. We don't see a horizon. We don't see a new perspective. So I'm not sure that the Palestinians will be able to convert this point into any kind of a win-win on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Husseini, for a very lucid presentation, lucid, realistic, and rather pessimistic, I would say. But the situation, of course, is negative, and we are very, very happy that you accepted our invitation and that we could hear your very clear and straight message. Robbie insists to take the floor, please. Go ahead.
We are actually already out of time, but I have the feeling that now we open the real debate. So perhaps we give it a couple of more minutes following the really very, very interesting introduction statement of Hiba. I wanted to say the following. The basic problem in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is a question of trust. Trust is a major component of also the dynamic between both peoples and their behavior, and on many, many fields. And what happened now with this peace agreement with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain is actually, from my point of view, reverse of the equation. The equation was always like that: first make a peace with the Palestinian, and then the Arab world, the moderate Arab world, will join and be open up for relations with Israel. And now it's exactly the other way around, hoping that then out of this situation where there might be a feeling of increasing trust, also in the regional context, from the Israeli public opinion point of view, negotiations to resume the Palestinian-Israeli conflict might evolve. And this is very well anchored. This is nothing that Netanyahu invented now with Trump. This is well anchored also in other initiatives in the past, also by Bougie Herzog, who was when he was the head of the Labour Party, or in the plan that was elaborated by the INSS lately, where they definitely say that the first step should be the normalization with the moderate Arab world, and out of that, then the negotiations to resume final status agreement between Palestinians and Israelis should evolve. So we have tried the other way of the equation for 30 or 40 years, and only with partial success. I mean, I think Oslo did have a partial success, I would say, not totally, but partially. It did generate some good outcomes. Now, why shouldn't we try this other way of the equation? Wouldn't you say that there is perhaps a chance that at the end of the day, serious negotiations with Palestinians and Israelis could develop out of a situation where the trust issue is more well anchored in normal relations with the Arab world?
Would you like to
May I-
answer? Yes, go ahead.
I agree with Robbie. I mean, to a large extent, it is a question of trust. The problem is it's very, very difficult from a Palestinian perspective when you see everything happening on the ground today and where the Israeli government is going with its activities in terms of the settlement buildup and the control over the natural resources. I mean, we want an end of the conflict, that's for sure. And we want a two-state solution, but the way the policies are revealing themselves do not lend to creating more trust, the trust that we need. So we're very reluctant and hesitant to believe, even for the slightest bit, that to try the reverse, which is, Arabs, Israel first, then a breakthrough vis-a-vis the Palestinians would be genuine. It's very difficult to see it coming. What should we wait another 10, 15, 20 years of the hardship we have and see if there's something for us as the Palestinians in this Arab normalization? Very difficult. I wish we would be able to do that.
Does anybody else want to comment on the reverse question that Robbie was actually raising, or Muriel? Senia, please. Okay.
Unmute yourself.
Yes.
Unmute yourself. A few things I would like to say from a perspective of, trying to see the geopolitics of this region without missing the very central conflict that we have, with the Palestinians, and without resolving this conflict, obviously, there will be no peace and no quiet and no security in the land of Israel. Along with that, I would like to say, and this is referring to the Iran Etzion's question that he posed in the very beginning of our discussion, that perhaps some shady deals might be at the heart of this recent deal between Israel and the Arab states. While we do not have, at least at this forum, I think, yes, some precise knowledge of the character of this deal and the essence of these deals, there might be some, there might not be some, but this is something that we as scholars and academics cannot now delve into, because we don't know, we don't have this data. But I can tell you for sure that yes, indeed, the Middle East is changing. While there were two things that were absent from yesterday's ceremony, there were mosques and there were Palestinians, right? But at the same time, I can tell you that indeed, not the Palestinians and not even Israel was in the center of what happened yesterday. I think what was in the center of this new deal is actually the threat that the Arab Sunni states are feeling from the direction of two non-Arab states and large states in our region. This is Iran and Turkey. And this is the end of it. The other component of this is that the United States is leaving Middle East. It's still important. It's still something that will always be at the center of geopolitical, importance to US, to Europe, and so on. But, it was clear since the first very days of President Obama. Now with Trump, I don't think that Biden, if he will be elected, he will be different. I think this is quite clear that United States is busy over the head with Southeast Asia, Iran, China, probably Russia as well, but definitely, not the Middle East, not the Palestinians, not any of that. There is simply no interest. So what I'm leading to is that, of course, the Arab states need to promote these alliances in order to ensure some security for themselves and some reliability on somebody that might be in need when they will need an ally in case of confrontation. But as for us and the Palestinians, it's clear that it's our responsibility. It's no one else's responsibility. Nobody will come and nobody will save and nobody will do anything in order to move us from this point zero at where we are right now. So it will definitely not be the United States, even if there will be change in administration. I do not see it coming. I do not see the interest shifting so tremendously, that the Americans will begin involved in this, business of, okay, who gets what kind of land where and so on. So it puts just more responsibility on the shoulders of those who do want to end the conflict. I think this is actually exactly right, that we are calling this conflict now the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Until very recently, it was called the Arab-Israeli conflict. Well, yes, the Arab states are indicating that right now, at least as for the governing elites, they've been promoting anti-Palestinian campaign during the last few months. Laisa Qadiyati, yes, this is not my issue. This is not my problem. So for them, it might be not their problem. This is their sovereign states, and just as Kazakhstan doesn't think that the Palestinian problem is the integral part of its identity, so the Arab states are now thinking the same. It's their call. The only country in the region that cannot afford to do this and cannot say Laisa Qadiyati, this is not my problem, is actually Israel. Okay, so because it is our problem, it's our everyday problem. I would just now expect, some political powers, trying to work out regional initiatives that are not dependent at all on the United States and probably not also in the European Union, of the conflict of interests and the tension that exists there. It's our business, it's regional affair, and so should we handle it with the most, energy that we can put into it. I think this is a responsibility of every Palestinian and every Israeli, so the question is how we translate this sense of emergency to people around us who right now think that some children waving Israeli flags in the Emirates, this is how peace should look like. Actually, it might, look like this someday, but it's still a very long way to get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Senia. And one last word from Muriel.
Just to add on what Ksenia said, I guess there is one more state, and that is Jordan, that really cares about the Palestinian issue because of the domestic relevance for Jordan. But actually, I wanted to go back to a question that René Wildangel asked in the Q&A section, if I may. Mm-hmm. And that is about, so what can be done if the PA fails? There is defections, there is BDS, which the Europeans are not really very fond of. And what I would like to say on that is that I don't think Europeans can create a Palestinian voice. That is something the Palestinians have to do. But still, Europeans can be helpful in that. And I think there is several things that Europeans can do and should do differently from the way they have been doing it so far. One is, of course, the continuation of supporting the presence, sumud, of Palestinians on their territory without engaging with occupation authorities. Big challenge, but Europeans need to figure out how to do that. Then it's about support for civil society, for youth movements, for young Palestinians to be able to make their voices heard and to organize, offering discussion fora, exchange, and opening the space for different perspectives of Palestinians rather than closing it ever more. that is one phenomenon I think we currently see in Europe, that it is becoming ever more difficult for Palestinians to voice their opinions, to put forward how they see the future. And that also drives them away from politics, because politics becomes so difficult within the Palestinian scene, but also outside. So I would wish that Europeans really open up the space and not delegitimize Palestinian voices and Palestinian stances by accepting definitions that basically delegitimize any Palestinian voice that is away from the old two-state mainstream paradigm. And then one way that what Europeans also should be doing and continue to be doing is supporting watchdogs that look at what occupation authorities are doing, but also what the Palestinian Authority, as long as it exists, is doing. Especially as these watchdogs are under so much attack from many sides. That's my last word on that. I think it's an important question, and it merits much more thought that I can put out in these few minutes, because that is one of the big challenges we will be facing, how to cooperate with the Palestinians in the absence of a strong voice and strong representatives.
Okay, Muriel, I think we have a last floor, which has been requested a long time ago, and this comes from Oded Eran. I think he's now here, and he would like to say something. So Oded, yes, now you can unmute yourself and you can speak.
I did. I'm sorry that I missed some of it. I listened to the first hour. Never mind. I think that this is the agreements last night are status quo agreements. That is to say, they take off from the table the annexation. I think that Netanyahu, from the beginning, even without the agreements, wouldn't have gone to formal annexation. This is not Netanyahu's decision from day one in government. Look at his record. So I think that this is a way in which he climbed down from the so-called tree of annexation. Number two, it is very disappointing that the agreement doesn't speak more about what is the ultimate goal of the Israelis and the Palestinians. There's nothing about a comprehensive agreement, two states not even mentioned in the agreement. It is very disappointing, mostly, of course, to the Israelis who want to see the two-state solution, and of course, the Palestinians. And the question is, and I think Muriel put it very succinctly, the Palestinians and the Israelis have to chart a new way for dealing with the ultimate solution of their conflict. And obviously, the paradigm that was maintained until now didn't work, and no matter how much effort we put into it. So the question is whether the Israelis and the Palestinians and the international community can change the paradigm without changing the ultimate goal, the strategic objective of the two-state solution. And I repeat what I said before, we need to go in steps, in an incremental way, maintaining all the time this beacon of the two-state solution. And here, we have to rely on two major international forces. One is a change in the United States political leadership. It's not up to us. And secondly, the willingness of Europe to change this paradigm that only a comprehensive and a simultaneous agreement will bring the solution. I think that if all of the major players, regional and international, will focus on this, it is the best insurance that the status quo is not maintained. There is no status quo. And what the agreement last night may bring about is that there will be no formal annexation, but there will be annexation, that units of housing units will be added. You create facts, more facts on the ground, which will basically put an end to the possibility of creating a Palestinian state, a viable Palestinian state. So I think that this is definitely something which Europe should do. I'm not so sure that Europe is able to doing it. When I look as an outside observer on the European situation, they still deal with Brexit, still deal with the Chinese threat or problem. Only 2 days ago, there was a summit between the EU leadership and Xi Jinping, not conclusive, didn't get far because the European, rightly so, has certain position, practical and ideological, but this is a serious problem. Turkey becomes a serious, very serious problem, the whole East Mediterranean. So I wonder if the European have the span of attention which will bring them to deal with the Middle East situation in a constructive way that can untangle this. As I say, this is what we achieved yesterday was a status quo agreement. This is not a way forward in terms of the solution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador or former Ambassador, for your clear words. Now you've opened up a new big debate on the role of the European Union and the European member states in the Middle East. Unfortunately, we don't have time because we have run out completely of time. This event was supposed to last for 90 minutes, and we've been online for nearly 2 hours. It's been extremely interesting for all of us. I would like to thank, first of all, the partners of IPN, in particular the Frederick Ebert Stiftung and also Macro Center. This beautiful and really dynamic couple, Dr. Hannah Santini and Dr. Buse for their work, and of course all our speakers today, Mrs. Vedlova, Mrs. Husseini, and Mrs. Asseburg. Thank you so much. I will only finish by recalling that on 27th of November this year, we are going to commemorate the launch of the Barcelona process, the Euro-Mediterranean Partnership. We don't know yet how the format will be, normally online format with all the ministers of the Euro-Mediterranean Partnership sitting together. And even if the spirit back in 1995, 1 year after the Oslo agreements, was very different, as we could see from today's spirit and from what is happening, we don't have to forget that this Barcelona process was the first exercise in which Palestine and Israel and Palestine were sitting on equal footing. Even if we would like this partnership to be enhanced, sometime we like to commemorate and remember the spirit that gave birth to this partnership. We hope that, in a way, in one way or another, this spirit will be strengthened in the coming months, because indeed, as we can see, there are a lot of things that need to be done. So thank you once again. And from my side, from the side of the European Institute for the Mediterranean, we mainly work with Arab Mediterranean countries, but we do believe that Israel is an important Mediterranean partner, and that's why we have created this partnership, and we look forward to continue working. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roger, for your efforts.
Bye.
Thank you, Roger. Thanks everyone for participating. Thank you.
Thank you.